Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to another session of Koto Family Life. For those of you who don't know us, we are Edward and Debbie Smith, and we are honored to be the Family Life Coordinators at Koto, the one and only Church of the Oranges.
Yes.
And today, like every other Saturday afternoon, we're excited to have you here with us, and we're really excited about our two guests. We are honored to have two doctors with us today, Dr. Racquel Gilpin and Dr. Wayne Greaves. They are no strangers to Orange. We look to them, we respect them, and today we're going to have a very candid conversation about COVID-19. Where are we now? Is it safe to go outside?
Right.
Or should we still be inside, covered up and protected?
Do we still need to put on the whole armor?
Right. We need to do that every day anyway.
Well, I was not referring to the whole armor of God.
Oh, just the COVID armor. Okay, got you. So welcome, Dr. Greaves. Welcome, Dr. Gilpin. Thank you for joining us today. We will give both of you a chance to kind of introduce yourself for those who might not know you. Tell a little bit about you, what you do, and then we're going to get into this dynamic discussion.
Awesome.
So ladies first, we'll ask Dr. Gilpin to get started.
Well, good afternoon. It's great to see you guys. And thank you so much for having both of us on the program this evening. So like you said, I'm Racquel Gilpin. Tell you a little bit about myself. I am a nurse manager at Overlook Medical Center, and I manage a variety of areas, including nursing education, a dialysis unit, and a vascular access unit. And I have been married for 17 years to Andrew Gilpin, and I have two boys, Brandon and Evan, two teenagers. So this is a very relevant topic for me that we're going to be talking about today. So thank you for having me.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us.
Dr. Greaves?
Yeah, I'm Wayne Greaves, and I am a physician, more of a physician and clinical researcher. I've spent much of my time not only in clinical medicine, internal medicine, but also in infectious diseases. I've been heavily involved in both research in the AIDS arena, and more recently in infectious diseases with viruses that cause some of the bad things that we're experiencing. Spent 3.5 years of my training at the Centers for Disease Control in Atlanta, Georgia. So I have some idea of what goes on there. And then I've been in clinical research since then, and right now I'm working on trying to develop some drugs for viruses, infectious disease related agents. And 2 kids, 1 boy and 1 girl. They're all grown, so I don't have the same concerns that Racquel has about what they should do or how to entertain them. And my wife, you probably all know, I'm very involved in the choir of the Church of the Oranges. Here I am.
Awesome. So infectious diseases and vaccines. So this is right in your wheelhouse. Like this is what you do.
Yep.
Yeah. Nice. So we're going to get right into it, right? So New York and New Jersey, things are quite different than they were back in March. However, how would you describe the current state of the coronavirus in the United States right now?
So I think we have to look at it as a whole and then in parts. If you look at the country as a whole, then I would say it is pretty much chaotic and mostly out of control in several areas. So we have brush fires or little clusters, outbreaks, and then we have forest fires. What has happened since March is that the epidemic has now shifted from the Northeast, where it was very, very evident in New Jersey, New York, Connecticut area. Now we're seeing the southern US and California being hit the hardest, and there where the fires are burning almost out of control.
Yeah.
We've also seen now an emphasis on a shift from older persons being the ones that are most affected to younger people. And as a result, we're seeing a lower death rate, case fatality is not as high, and some people are misinterpreting this to mean that it's no longer serious. But I think we're beginning to see a shift now where that, in fact, we're seeing a little bit of increase in the death rates even in those areas. So there's eventually going to be spread from the younger folks to the older folks, I think older folks have been taking more care, but still there's going to be some transmission. Since March, we've also recognized that there's a wider range of symptoms that we're seeing in individuals. This loss of smell and taste. We're seeing strokes in young people. We're seeing more GI symptoms. We're seeing many more clotting disorders, people with pulmonary emboli. We're seeing MIs. We're seeing renal failure. And in kids, we're seeing a new syndrome we call multi-system inflammatory disease in children. So we're still learning about this virus. It is not a simple virus. And it's really keeping us humble. And things that I may say today may change later on. One of the bigger things that we've come to recognize recently that is of importance to us is that there's now the recognition that there's a disproportionate impact of COVID-19 on people of color. And so Blacks are affected perhaps 2 to 2.5 times more compared to whites. And so too are Latinx and other folks, people of color. One good thing is that since March, we now have at least 2 drugs that are approved and that show they can be used and of some help in persons who are infected with this virus and go on to develop severe disease. And this is a drug called remdesivir. And then there's another drug called dexamethasone, which has been around for a while and is really being repurposed in this setting. But the difficulty or the limitation is that these drugs are approved for treating people who have already developed the disease and are pretty badly off. We still don't have anything for people with mild disease or moderate disease. And as you know, a significant proportion of those who are infected are asymptomatic. 80% of people who are infected with this virus will not develop severe symptoms or even moderate symptoms. 15% will go on to have more severe symptoms, and 5% will have very, very severe symptoms, end up in the hospital, probably on ventilators, and then a number will die. So that's kind of where we are with the epidemic. It has changed, but it's still around. The virus hasn't disappeared.
Right.
We've just learned how to take better steps to control it in some areas. In other areas, people don't want to follow the steps that work in our area.
So 2 questions before Racquel give her response is, can you break down to us as to why is it that even though younger folks are now, it's now showing up in younger folks, why is it that the death rate is less? And 2, why is it that it is attacking people of color more than other?
Okay, so for why younger people, I think perhaps 2 reasons. Younger people are now taking more risks. You're seeing younger people flocking to the beaches, in nightclubs, in bars. Those are places where there's a high risk of transmission. Yeah. So the fact that there are, congregating in crowded places puts them at greater risk. And I think that that's a large part of why we're seeing it transmitted more in that group. I think that older folks are being more careful, not going out unnecessarily. So that's probably why. The other concern is that in younger people, for the most part, the disease isn't quite as devastating as in older individuals. And that explains, I think, why we aren't seeing as many deaths. When there are more deaths, people are more concerned. So there's not that urgency and sense of concern. And the silly thing is that there are people hosting COVID parties. Young folks are getting together just to become infected. And the attitude is, well, I may as well get infected now. Even if I get sick, I won't get too sick. Let me get the virus now. Hard to imagine.
Yeah, crazy. Just today, I heard about a young lady, I think 20, I want to say 25, somewhere around there, who got infected with COVID-19 and ended up in the hospital for several weeks. And the doctor said to her, the way that the virus attacked her body, it was like she had been struck by lightning. She actually ended up losing part of her colon. And she said when she initially went into the hospital, she thought she was going to be there for a few days. She's young, she's healthy, would be in and out. She ended up spending weeks in the hospital, lost part of her colon. And so because it's so new and we're still learning so much, we don't know how it's going to affect someone's body. And I think that's kind of the scary, the scary part.
And there are young people who die. So
yeah,
because you're young doesn't mean you can't die. There are some deaths among young people. In fact, the first person who really broke the news in China, as far as we can tell, in the medical group was a young ophthalmologist. He was, I think, 34.
Wow.
So, this virus doesn't really cure.
Yeah.
And in anything, not everyone becomes infected, and some of the immune resistance may be led to or immune function, but we don't really know. But we also know that perhaps it depends on what we call the inoculum size, how much in terms of concentration of the virus you're exposed to. If you think of it as a rainstorm, heavy rain versus just light showers.
Mm-hmm.
If you're in heavy rain, you're being drenched very quickly, and your immune system may not be able to cope. The virus may be in your face and goes all the way down to your lungs quickly.
Mm-hmm.
With a lighter exposure, your body may be able to handle what is exposed to more easily. I mean, these are theories, but this is one way to think of it.
Yeah.
Before I forget your other question about white people of color, although the answer isn't completely in, what we can say is that many people of color often live in and work in situations where they can't physically distance the 6 feet that we need. Many are in crowded homes, crowded settings. They work in areas where they have to be exposed. Many of them are first responders. They're working in the service industry. There are people working in the transportation industry. They're out there and they're exposed. And, there are diseases that place individuals at greater risk for this COVID-19 disease. People with diabetes, people with sickle cell anemia, people who are overweight or severely overweight, chronic lung disease, all those kinds of chronic illnesses that are more common in communities of color put people at additional risk. And finally, one thing that's being looked at carefully now is the fact that vitamin D may play a very important role in moderating the immune response in this infection. It appears that as the infection progresses, the immune system tries to respond to fight it off. And sometimes the immune system goes into overdrive and goes too far and doesn't know when to stop and begins to destroy the tissues themselves. Vitamin D seems to play a moderating effect in that setting. And so because people of color or dark-skinned people don't make enough or as much vitamin D when exposed to sunlight, and because of our lifestyle where so much indoors, people with dark skins will suffer more from being indoors more than people with lighter skins. And so there's a concern, and we do know that individuals with lower levels of vitamin D tend to do worse. They often enter more ICU, and there are studies that show this. It doesn't mean that there's a causal effect, but there's that association that's of concern that we're looking at.
Wow.
Mercy. Dr. Gilpin, I know you are there on the front line. What is it that you're seeing, especially among the younger folks?
So really just to confirm what Doc has been saying, when we first started seeing patients come in, we did see a disproportionate number of patients of color who were coming in. And the age range, we saw patients, 50 and older, who had other comorbidities and underlying disease, who were coming in and just a rapid decline, ended up being intubated on a ventilator, and the prognosis for many of these patients was not good, and we saw many patients die. But I have to say that we did see our share of young people. I remember physically transporting a young man that was 28 years old, who was on a ventilator and had just really no significant underlying disease, had some sleep apnea. But other than that, there was no other major or chronic diseases. And he was sick. He was in the hospital for a while. And he eventually got better and, successfully was able to be extubated, taken off the ventilator, and eventually was discharged successfully. So that was great, but he had a long struggle. And, the other part of this too is that it'll be interesting to follow these patients once they're discharged, because you are still seeing people who have survived, who even after 100 days are still having, you know, residual effects from the disease. And some people will have long-term effects from how the disease has ravaged, the virus has ravaged their body, you know, chronic respiratory issues, and even having to be on dialysis long-term. That was another area that was initially quite surprising, that we saw so many of these patients requiring dialysis. They were so sick, the body just, the disease attacked the kidneys, because many of these patients had not previously been on dialysis or would have been expected to require dialysis, and as a result had to be placed on dialysis, and some even having to stay on after they had improved. So as Dr. Greaves had mentioned, you know, when you think about what the comorbidities are, especially within our you know, our African American, African Caribbean people of color, we tend to have a lot of these underlying disease that either have not been diagnosed or they haven't been managed effectively, or just due to your circumstances, the environments in which you work or your exposure, you're placed at higher risk. So it's something that we really have to pay attention to, how we, if nothing else we've learned from this experience, that your health is important. And the most we can do to ensure that we are healthy, it is not time wasted, because the healthier you are, the stronger your chances are for fighting this disease. And so if there's things that we can do now, strategies that we can put in place, it's important to do that. And being young is not kind of a get out of jail card. You're not invincible. You know, when you're young, you think, you know, I can deal with anything, but we're fighting a disease that's quite, you know, it changes, it's morphing all the time. Yeah. So, and I kind of attribute it to playing Russian roulette. You know, am I going to get the empty chamber? Am I going to get the chamber with the slug?
Yeah, yeah, and it's so interesting because, you know, not only do we want our young people to think about, you know, okay, you might get the disease and might come through fine and survive, but the likelihood of you infecting your family, your parents, your grandparents, they might not come through it as easily as you. And there was just a story of a young man in Florida, a 21-year-old, right, who went out with friends, and his dad is still on a ventilator. You know,
his whole family got sick.
Yeah, the entire family got infected. So, you know, that's definitely something that's very concerning. And, you know, so I work at a university and they just decided we're going to be virtual for the fall. And the students are up in arms. Like, they see, why can't we come back to school? We need to be on campus. But we know that if they come back on campus, they're not social distancing. They're not, you know, wearing masks. They're, you know, but they don't realize that it's for their protection as well as the rest of the campus community. They really feel that they're invincible.
So that brings me to my next question. Here it is that we have gone through COVID-19 through spring, right? And you know, and here it is now that it's time for school to reopen. Children have been home all through the entire summer as well, you know, and, you know, social distancing, you can't go anywhere and stuff. So now they're eager to get back to school. But we know that even though going to school is a good thing for children, teenagers, it can be detrimental as it relates to this this virus. You know, what advice do you have for anyone who has children that wants to go back to school?
Yeah, how do you make that decision? It's tough.
So it's a very complicated decision. And I think after looking at the current data that we have, that there's no one policy that will fit everywhere. And here's how I'll break it down. We now know from research that's been published in South Korea that children 0 to 9 years old don't seem to transmit the virus as readily to others as we thought. There's good data looking at households where that happens. However, kids older than 9 and up tend to transmit more like adults. What that tells us is that we probably can't have the same policy for elementary schools and high schools and colleges. The second thing we need to consider is the prevalence of the infection in the immediate area. There are some areas in the country where it's very low, what we call the R0 or R0 rate, how likely it is for one individual to infect another. We want this to be less than 1. There are areas where there is not much virus circulating, but then there are areas like Arizona and Texas and Florida. So I think the local school boards, along with the parents and the teachers and the medical professionals in that area, need to get together and help develop policies for the specific area. I don't think the same policy needs to apply to every state in the same manner. And again, looking at the age differences that I just mentioned, we need to be concerned also about how you're going to develop your policy. It has to be very, very clear. So people know exactly what will happen in case, for example, there's a fire drill. What are you going to do? You know where to go? In case a teacher becomes ill or a student becomes ill, clear setup before. I think the French, at least in the Paris region, approached this issue very carefully. They opened schools, but they did it gingerly. Half of a class initially, 2 days a week, alternating with the other half, and then 3 days a week for that one, on and off for a while, and they watched to see what would happen. We can also learn from some camps that have been in force so far in the summer, where there's one counselor to 6 or 8 individuals, and they form their own little bubble. Each kid brings to the camp their own food. There's no eating in any general cafeteria. You only mix with a group in your little bubble or group. You don't mix with the other campers. And that seems to work pretty well, at least in Pennsylvania. So there are ways to do things, but in a school context, there are even bigger issues. Can you really socially distance? Especially when you get into little kids, it's very tough, like in daycare settings and so on. So it calls for a lot of thought. And then, are these kids going to wear masks or face shields or both? And I'm actually more concerned with the teachers and the custodians and all those who are going to be also working in the school. It's not just about the kids, although that's important. I understand that parents want their kids to be back in school. And I think most educators will agree it is a better thing to do. But the problem is, and people keep quoting places like France and other countries where the schools will reopen. But where the schools have been reopened in other countries, they didn't have the level of virus present that we're seeing in the United States. We didn't wait until the epidemic had quieted enough. The curve hadn't fallen flat enough before we were rushing to open bars, restaurants, whatever. So I think we need to be very cautious about the schools because we may not have the same experience as other countries that moved to open schools after there was more control of the epidemic.
Absolutely.
So,
I agree with Dr. Greaves that indeed it's not a one size fits all. It's not a cookie cutter. You have to look at those factors. I think you have to ask the questions as well. So one, you're looking at what's going on currently in your area. And then if you're sending your child into daycare or an elementary school or even high school, what is the plan in place for cleaning the environment? How frequently are they cleaning the environment? What's the training that's going to be involved? Is it going to be the teachers that are expected to teach the children, to clean up after them? They're going to be the housekeeper and everything. That is an additional burden on the staff. So you've got to ask that question, because if it's only one person responsible to maintain the area or the environment, that's going to become challenging, and you might have not as effective a process for decreasing the transmission on surfaces and all of that. So I think it's important to ask those questions. And if you have options, some districts are offering either a hybrid where it's 2 days in school and 3 days online, or exclusively online. And we know Governor Murphy did put out an executive order that schools could offer a totally online option, because also you have to think about not just the kids, but also the teachers and the other support staff. They might also be immunocompromised. They might have underlying disease, and so they're also putting themselves at risk. So you want it to find the best balance. And you have to, trust your gut. Even if everybody's saying it's okay to forge ahead, if you don't feel comfortable, if you have a child who is immunocompromised, meeting with their pediatrician and getting, a waiver to go to school and submitting that to the board. The school board is also another option if you have concerns about a child with an underlying illness. A lot of kids have asthma and other respiratory disease. Will be heading into flu season, which further compounds the concerns around disease spread. And, is it the flu? Is it corona? Is it something else? Right. It's a lot of things to think about. So under normal circumstances, it can be challenging, much less now with dealing with something that we don't know. And I agree also that we kind of ran ahead before things had truly settled. And there really needs to be a more concerted effort in recognizing the seriousness of this public health issue and making decisions that are going to keep the majority safe and not pander to politics.
Yeah. So I want to add that teachers are some of the most important professionals in society, but they're so under-recognized and so poorly paid.
Absolutely.
It's a shame for them to be just bullied into going back to school. Mm-hmm. Proper policies are set in place. And I think one important policy should be that there is no retribution or no lack of benefits should they come forward to disclose they're not well.
Right.
You have to have those kind of protections built in to be able to have an efficient and a really smooth functioning policy, whenever you set it up.
Absolutely. Okay, so question, let's do a paradigm shift right now from teachers, etc., and staff to now parents. Now you have your parents home or your grandparents and stuff, and your kids or or grandchildren are in school. They're coming home. Should you, as a parent who has an compromised immune system, should you, as a parent, now quarantine yourself from your children or your grandchildren? Yeah, and if the answer is yes, how should that look? Because now we are going into a total different realms, which means that I won't be able to hug my grandchild or hug my son or my daughter. There can't be any close proximity. How should that work?
Yeah, so that's a real challenge. And as I said earlier, based on the current data we have, it seems as though ages up to 9 is not as big a risk. But if you're over 9, then that's a concern. Your elementary or middle school, high school kids, that's a concern. And if you are a parent with, a chronic health condition, and I worry for those in the Black community in particular, diabetes has now been shown to be a very important risk factor. Hypertension to some extent, but, and recently sickle cell disease has kind of come up to a higher level of risk, hypertension. Yeah, I think if I were a parent, I'd want to minimize direct exposure. Clearly, you can't do it completely. And so, again, you can ask someone in your household to wear a mask, but, I don't know how practical it is going to be. I think you have to do what you feel reasonably safe to do, understanding what the ideal is. Not unnecessarily closeness, but it's not really practical to say you can't interact with them if they're going to be in the same household. What some people have done is they've moved elsewhere if they can afford to move elsewhere and live with others and have a younger person, if there's such a person, help take care of the kids, someone who doesn't have the same health risk as they do. But that's also not practical for a lot of people. And certainly in our communities, that's going to be non-existent. So I don't know what will happen. I'll be interested to hear what Dr. Gilpin has to say about this one as a parent for kids in the home.
Yeah, it's so during the peak of when it was in our, we were at the peak of the pandemic here, and I was going into work. Both my husband and I are essential workers, so we were going in. Our boys were home, and my mother was also with us, and so we tried to ensure that we took the necessary steps, the hand hygiene, you kind of take off all the clothing and stuff that is exposed before if there's any greeting or anything like that, just to minimize any exposure to them. And you did the best that you could, because you truly can't completely minimize your interaction. You're all in the same home. And we were able to do that successfully, thank God. There wasn't any issues, and we continue to use those same practices. But I do think that if it depends on the extent of the individual in the home who might be immunocompromised or has the underlying disease, because if it's someone who is truly sick, acutely, or they're not, they're managing the chronic disease, and it's an ongoing challenge, you really have to be considerate about not putting them at risk. So if you live in a multi-level home, maybe then they're staying on one level and you're staying on one level. Maybe if there's food preparation is being done in the home, you try to keep things separately so they can access it, or you're wiping down surfaces and leaving, and then so that they can come in and also do what they need to do. If you don't have a multi-level home, just kind of containing to one room, especially someone starting to exhibit symptoms, you'd want to kind of isolate them to one area and minimize kind of going throughout the home, which can be challenging. But I think, when you talk about even hugging and, teenagers probably not as affectionate as they were when they were toddlers. So that might not be such a challenging thing. But I do think, depending on the circumstances in each home, you have to do the best you can with what is available, because it's not always, it's not a black and white issue. It's not as simple as just, okay, you stay over there and I stay over here. You may not, you might just be sharing one bathroom. So if you're sharing one bathroom, making sure you're wiping down the surfaces, the high touch areas, the door handles, the light switch, the basins and all of that stuff, doing that to minimize exposure.
Yeah.
Someone has said we have to give people the grace to say they're doing the best they can.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I'm glad that you mentioned wiping down surfaces, right? Because when the virus first came out, we heard droplets. So it was spread through droplets, and so you wipe down the surface, you disinfect, but now we're hearing might be airborne. Mm-hmm. So what should we believe? How do we handle?
Clearly, most of the spread is through droplets, mm-hmm. But I think the evidence is clear that there's still the possibility for airborne transmission. Mm. We know that the smaller particles, can persist in the air easily for 3 hours, just sit around. Mm-hmm. Wow. Now, it doesn't mean that it causes or that there's automatically going to be airborne transmission. It starts to get inside of you. Mm-hmm. And the longer you remain in that setting where you're sitting with all this stuff around you, your risk increases. Mm-hmm. So there's several ways that we can limit our risk. As I tell people, there's certain settings that are clearly at risk. Closed indoor spaces are bad news. Mm-hmm. Because there's not much ventilation, not much circulation. If you have to be indoors, try to open windows if you can. Air conditioning units that send stuff around and around are bad things to be doing unless you have HEPA filters or something connected to them. So you have to think of all of this. So the data seems to be still that primarily is droplet transmission, but that there is the possibility for airborne transmission. For a long time, WHO resisted even addressing this. Mm-hmm. But now there is such a preponderance of research that makes it seen that this is, although perhaps not the major mode of transmission, at least something you cannot say does not happen. And it kind of makes sense. The other virus can do this, both droplets and airborne. And then that leads us into other discussions about, well, then how do you protect yourself? But maybe you'll go there later on. I think I'll just stop here for now, just point out that the setting is very important when it comes to airborne transmission. And again, we talked about distance, and the closer you are to a person, you know, the higher the inoculum of virus is likely to be. And there's some activities where it is higher. If you sneeze, you're going to send more stuff into the air than if you cough. If you cough, you're going to send more stuff into the air than if you're just talking loudly. If you're singing, you're also sending more stuff in the air than if you're talking. And there have been outbreaks in quiet settings, as you know. So there are all these things to think about.
I think Doc illustrates a point, a very good point that we have been seeing as this the disease, the virus has evolved, is like I would say. And what I think would be important to get out to those who are listening is that we don't have all the information about this virus. It's constantly changing. However, it's dangerous to then say, because what was recommended 2 months ago and it's changed now, that, oh, it was, see, they don't know what they're talking about, or we're being deceived. We have to realize that this is, it's called novel corona. It's new. We're still learning. This is not an established virus. There's some similarities to other viruses, and there's some things that are just, you know, has all of us just scratching our heads. So it's important to stay abreast of the changes, take a very open-minded approach to the recommendations that are being made. Initially, we were not, it was not mandated that, or even recommended to wear masks in public, but we saw how that changed and the implications of that. So I think what's important is that we really stay open-minded to, as we learn more about the virus, that we can adapt and be flexible and not become rigid, because that can put us at higher risk of either getting the disease or transmitting it.
Yeah. And it's interesting that you bring up masks, because that's exactly where I was going next. You know, they're not needed. Then it's, some places it's mandatory. Some places it's, you know, it's recommended, but not mandatory. There's some people who just think they're useless. What are your thoughts on masks? Do you both wear masks? When do you wear a mask? And how effective do you believe that they truly are against this virus?
Just to start by reiterating what Dr. Gilpin said, we have to stay humble. This virus is teaching us that we don't know everything.
Yeah.
And what we're discussing today, we might have different information in the next month or two. So we don't want to say this is the gospel. This is what we know now, and this is how we're going to adapt to what we know now. We've learned a lot. Like I said, we never thought a viral infection that causes pneumonia would cause strokes in people, would cause massive pulmonary emboli, that would cause heart attacks. This is a crazy virus. I mean, this is unusual. But you said novel. This is a very, very strange virus. And we probably aren't finished learning what else it can do. Just to get to masks, so the mask has also unfortunately been politicized. When we first started talking about masks, it is true that masks tend to prevent the larger droplets, but not the smaller particles from spreading. And the big thing was that, oh yeah, you wear it to protect the other person, not so much yourself. And some wouldn't even recommend it, because there was also concern there weren't enough masks early on for health professionals to get them. So there was no incentive for CDC or anybody else to promote masks. That has slowly or reluctantly changed. But I tell you, I think we should pay attention to what has been done in Asian countries. From the beginning, they knew they're used to SARS. They've had these outbreaks before. They knew that there's benefit to wearing masks. We sat here and poo-pooed them and laughed at them. Now we're having to go back and do the same thing. Yeah. I will say this quickly. Not every mask is the same. Not all masks are equal. If you're going to make your own mask or buy masks, the masks with a higher thread count of cotton are better than those with a lower thread count. A bandana is not going to protect you as much as stitch mask or surgical mask. An N95 respirator mask will protect you much, much more. But that's the kind that we tend to reserve for medical professionals. But the mask that I wear, for example, we look around, we choose which ones we buy. We look at the thread count, we look at the material. We know that certain types of material with cotton, like chiffon and flannel and so on, and we know that filters that you can insert in a mask also add protection. So pay some attention if you're going to wear a mask. But we now know, say this way, masks don't only protect the other person. That's another fallacy that I like to see people stop saying. It's just for the other person. It's not just for the other person. It's mostly for the other person, but we now know that some of the masks that you can buy protect you as well.
Correct.
N95 mask clearly protects you more than the other person. And you can now make do-it-yourself masks. There are instructions all over the internet and telling you, and there are studies that show how the type of material influences the protective ability of the mask to you, not just the other person. So I wish people would stop saying it's just for the other person, because that gives people no incentive to even wear the mask.
Absolutely.
And I think that's a great point, because you would have an interest in protecting yourself as opposed to the other person. So
Right.
You would be more influenced to want to wear the mask to protect yourself as opposed to another person.
And I'm not saying it's great, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying just do that. You have to still practice physical distancing.
Right.
But the mask can be helpful, and people can go do their own research and make up their own minds, but it's not zero protection to yourself and just all the protection to the other person. That is very misleading.
Right. And I think too, it's important to realize properly wearing your mask. I have actually taken up my own little personal campaign, if I see someone not wearing a mask properly, to point out to them the proper way to use the mask. And I approach it in the sense that, I'm concerned for your safety, and just you may not realize. And so, it should be above, it shouldn't be below you. If I'm seeing your nostrils, that mask is doing nothing for you. If it's under your chin, it's doing nothing for you. If there's not a tight seal around the side of the face, it's doing nothing for you. So begrudgingly wearing something over your face, it's almost like you think about, seat belts. If you see if you are not faithfully putting on a seatbelt when you're in your car and you see a police officer, you just kind of pull the strap over your shoulder, but it's not locked in. When you put your mask on, kind of, just so that they look like you have something on, that's what you're doing. If you get into an accident and that seatbelt is not secure, you're dead or you're significantly injured. So kind of think about that when you think about not wearing your mask effectively. And there's numerous images online, both comical and serious, that illustrate the proper ways of wearing a mask.
Yeah.
Just to go back to, you asked me if I wear a mask. I'll tell you when I wear a mask and how I do it. So I go riding quite a bit or walking around my area. I don't usually wear a mask because I know my area and there's hardly anybody around. If I anticipate, I walk with a mask in my pocket or somewhere.
Prepared.
If I anticipate I'm going to run into someone, it goes on before I get close to them.
Mm-hmm.
If I see somebody walking on my street on the other side, I tend to walk on the other side. I mean, this is just, you have to do this, but just saying what I do. But I always walk with a mask, and think about why you're using the mask. If you're in a forest or you're somewhere where it's desolate and isolated, you're outdoors. That's the key thing. You're outdoors. Indoors, there's no discussion. You wear a mask, period. Yeah. Outdoors, I think you can have some leeway and judgment in terms of whether or not you're close to people, the crowded setting, all those things. So I think you must always walk with a mask because you don't know what's going to happen. But in general, and for example, if I go riding, the kind of mask that I wear is a lighter mask so I can breathe more easily than the really thicker mask where I really want as much protection as I want. So I'm thinking about why I'm wearing the mask and so making those kinds of decisions.
Gotcha.
Okay, so since we're on the mask and both of you are doctors, let me ask a question, because I've seen a lot of stuff writing about, the downside effect that mask has, it interferes with your respiratory system, and it can cause long-term illnesses, etc., etc. Shed some lights on that for us, please.
So that's been largely debunked for most people. There are some individuals who really can't wear masks, but there are few. And so a physician can, in those cases, have an exemption for certain individuals. But for most people, they can wear a mask. And the other thing is this: if people really have trouble wearing masks, the way that they're introduced to mask wearing is to wear it for a short time. Something that's not thought to be infectious. Pull it down a bit, breathe, go back, and gradually increase the amount of time until they can get used to the idea of wearing a mask. Because sometimes it's more psychological than actually truly medical. But psychological things can be real, so I don't want to downplay it. But I don't remember where the study is right now, but there's actually a study that's been done looking at this business of the medical negative consequences of masks, and it's really very, very, very minimal. So that's overrated hype by people who don't want to wear masks and are using it as an excuse to promote non-mask wearing. But there are some individuals in medical conditions where it's not recommended. And Racquel, you might say more about that.
Yes, I agree. I think it's important. This is another, I think, important lesson for us to understand and to share with the audience is research the information, try to understand, go to sources that are validated sources to get information. I know a lot of us have access to WhatsApp and YouTube, and a friend of a friend sends you a video and it seems pretty convincing, and oh my goodness, I'm never going to wear masks again. And what we don't want to get caught up in is hype or propaganda or distractions. So someone might send you that information, take the time to investigate it. Go to reliable sources, the CDC, there's other government agencies that provide information about whatever question or theory you may have, or reach out to individuals that you can call Doc, you can call myself, what do you think about this? Ask individuals who may have some knowledge about it instead of putting yourself at risk, believing something, and then it's not factual. So, the Bible tells us that we should, study and search to show ourselves approved. You don't want to just, because someone says it, that you accept it. You need to validate it, sort it out, look at the information, who's paying for it, who's sponsoring it, or what's the hidden agenda. Because a lot of these, I receive a lot of, group chat videos and information about the fact that, Corona is a hoax and, 5G and all of these things. And we just have to be careful that I think one of the challenges that we've had with this pandemic is that it was not initially looked at as a public health emergency. It was looked at as a political ploy. And that platform has caused hundreds of thousands of people to die who probably shouldn't have, because it was not taken seriously. And unfortunately, when we were having when the Northeast was experiencing the peak, the rest of the nation, unfortunately, a lot of the other states did not take what we were experiencing seriously. And now they are feeling the repercussions of that somewhat negligence in being prepared or learning from what we had experienced. And so I just want to encourage people to get the facts. There's a lot of information out there and it's confusing and you don't always know who to believe, but try to get it from a reliable source.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I know that we are, that 1 hour time is up on us. But I must ask this question. Apart from, protecting yourself as it relates to mask, and social distancing and try to be outside as best as possible and not being locked up in a confined area, etc. Are there anything that we should be taking, like should we be up on our vitamin C's, B12?
He wants some remedy.
We West Indian, should we be drinking a lot of ginger, lemon, etc. I don't know if you want to talk about anything as it relates to.
I can share with you what a number of physicians and others are using themselves. This is not proven stuff, but they're considered more as integrative, quote unquote, medical stuff. And, you know, it's a take it or leave it kind of situation, not trying to promote this. But even before I go there, I mean, stick to the simple things. Don't stay in the house all the time. At least go take a walk outside, get outside, outdoors. Your risk is so much lower. You know, if you have kids at home, let them get a little bit, take them to the park or something, you know. And honestly, if they have friends and their parents are pretty much sticking in their little bubble, and there's not much of a risk of them going out to be exposed, you know, you have to know your friends, basically is what I'm saying.
Mm-hmm.
And you may be able to meet with one other family. Don't get too wild and start meeting a whole bunch of families, but you know what I'm saying? Don't be so cooped in that you just stay in your little circle. You can probably open up your circle a little bit, primarily outdoors again. I'm stressing outdoors, meet outside or somewhere, rather than being cooped in. So the stuff that people tend to recommend a lot is vitamin D. We alluded to, because of this association with the lower vitamin D levels and apparently a worse outcome. And there, you know, proper clinical trials that are now starting to really assess the value of this. We won't know for a while. But in the meantime, people feel like, you know, this is relatively innocuous. If you take 2,000 to 5,000 units a day, you're probably going to be okay. Especially if you can't get outside to get some sunlight. Now, if you can get 10 to 15 minutes of sunlight a day, you probably don't need all this stuff. But others have also been using vitamin C, anywhere from 250 to 500 milligrams, you know, once or twice a day, and they swear by it. And I also take myself something that's called NSC, N-acetylcysteine, 600 milligrams twice a day, just because it's kind of an immune booster. But I can't say it does anything or not. It's more a psychological thing. And then there are some people who are really into, if they think they've been exposed to someone who's coughing and sneezing, they're worried about COVID, they will go and start taking zinc lozenges every 2 hours for the next 3 or 5 days. So, you know, the evidence on zinc is a little iffy. For a common cold, it seems to decrease the duration of cold symptoms by a day or two. Not sure it does anything for COVID, but I'm just sharing with you what people have done. I'd say perhaps the better approach is try to eat healthy. Get a good balanced meal, mostly plant-based foods. You know, if you can do that, that'd be great. And the other important thing, I think, is to try to get enough sleep. Sleep allows your immune system to recover and regenerate. And there's a lot of information on this. And we live in a time where we hardly sleep enough. We just can't sleep enough. And then a little exercise doesn't have to be anything vigorous. Even 5 minutes a day of regular brisk walking is something that most people can do. And if you can ride like Dr. Gilpin, he does even better.
Right.
He rides many, many miles. So all those are good things though, you know, just to keep your body healthy. Dr. Gilpin, you may have some more things to add.
Well, Doc took away all the things that I wanted to say. But I'll say this. I remember when we started getting the number of admissions at our hospital started increasing, and my days were really long, and I was feeling the effects of just, you know, the physical and emotional drain that you feel from just trying to tackle this. And I realized that in order, you know, you kind of have to be, this was going to be a marathon, not a sprint. And so you really kind of have to go back to those basics. And I cannot reinforce or reiterate the fact that you have to find balance. And so like Dr. Greaves says, you know, eating a balanced meal, foods that are going to build up your immune system, you know, taking your garlic and juicing, getting fruits and vegetables, those things, making sure that you are sticking with more plant-based, less processed foods is just overall better for us. It decreases our blood sugar, you know, getting exercise, you know, it helps to regulate your blood pressure and all of those things, because when we neglect to do those things, we put ourselves at higher risk of being susceptible to the disease. And for me, my stress release has been biking, and just getting out into the fresh air, especially in the morning or in the evening when it's a little bit cooler. I go for long rides, but even if you're just doing a mile, it's better than not at all. Another thing that I think, especially within our West Indian culture, going out gardening is a nice, relaxing. You're getting one with the earth. You're growing products. You're pleased with what's coming out. You're able to eat. Talk about farm to table. You don't have to spend as much going to a restaurant for farm to table. You could do that right at home, and you're also getting exercise. So I think that is an important takeaway. We cannot take our health for granted. We cannot. And sleep. Yes. And I feel like the more exercise you do in the day, you're tired at the end of the day. You get a better quality sleep at night. So yes.
Awesome. So Dr. Greaves, you touched on this a little bit, and I kind of want us to bring it back full circle and kind of end here. So our children have been cooped up for a long time. They want to hang out. They want to see their friends. JD wants to go to Brandon's house. Kyle wants to go to JD's house. And there's still this fear that we as parents have, what are some of the things, how are some of the ways that we can allow our children to socialize in a safe way? Is there a way for them to do that in a safe way? If you can just share a couple of activities that we can do. I know Dr. Greaves, you mentioned one other family, getting them together, preferably outdoors. Any other ways that we can kind of help them to socialize safely?
Right. So the first caveat would be meet outdoors. That's where I go. So if your kids say wanted to meet with Dr. Gilpin's kids, I said let's arrange we're gonna meet at the park. And I would say your initial meeting, I would probably make it not too long, because we know that the risk depends also on the time of your exposure. Mm-hmm. They can meet. If they're, I would try to still keep the social distancing even though they're outdoors. But at least they can talk with each other. They can have fun, they can spend some time together. You can even eat, but don't eat too close again. So you can do those kinds of things. But again, I would say before you do that, always ask questions. Is the kid well? Are the parents well? If anybody has any symptoms, any fever, forget it. You can't do it then. Yeah. But if your questions are okay, then to me, your next step is that you can try meeting outdoors in very small groups to start, unless there are symptoms going on. And not for too long to start. And again, with social distancing and wearing a mask. Dr. Gilpin, would you add anything?
Yes, I think it's important, especially for the kids, to just have them explain to them and understand what the concerns are. Because if they don't understand, sometimes they feel like mom and dad are just being mom and dad. But if you kind of set the ground rules before you get there, after you've established that yes, everyone's relatively safe to get together, and I agree, it should be an outdoor gathering, it shouldn't be indoors. Set the ground rules, these are the expectations, and if you adhere to these, then maybe we can do it again. If we identify that your mask is dropping off, or you're kind of disregarding some of the practices that are recommended, then we can't repeat this. So I think it's important to establish that and then go from there, because yes, they do need socialization, and they may be communicating via text and Snapchat and TikTok and all the social platforms that they have out there. But there's something about getting together in a physical way that is also helpful for them. So if it can be done safely, yes, and minimize the time. This can be a 5-hour, where we're playing, tackle football.
Right.
We can't do those, contact sports. Even basketball, I feel like, I know that they're looking to do some activities like that. You have to really minimize the number of people and the amount of time they're spending, and that they are using effective hand hygiene, because that is an age group that sometimes hygiene is not as good as it should be.
Right.
It's just, washing their hands, you think with this pandemic, it was kind of comical to see how much reinforcement we had to do with adults about washing hands properly. And so it's not just running the water over your hands, it's actually a vigorous, scrub. So getting them to understand that and why, is helpful. So we don't want to put them in a situation where they slip and forget and potentially put themselves at risk.
So close contact sports will be out, wrestling and basketball and football and soccer. Soccer actually could be if you don't have many people playing, just keep your distance. Soccer,
I think soccer, yes, I agree. And actually, Doc, so to that point, there was a question that came up about a few of the young men getting together, and basketball is the game of choice that they want to participate in. And my suggestion is if they're going to be doing that, they're going to have to be doing much more frequent hand hygiene. Because
that's kind of close though for body.
Correct. You're sweating, even if they're wearing a mask, I had some concerns about that. So,
But that's where writing comes in again. If they have bikes, you can keep your distances right. It's such a nice.
Yeah, these teenagers are much more fascinated with basketball and football. Not even soccer, because I think probably of those
soccer would be okay.
Soccer would be the least close contact, because they're kicking as opposed to touching it with their hands. And so yes, I agree. If they're going to look at an option and they really just truly want to play together in a small environment, soccer probably would be the most ideal.
Yeah, awesome. Well, it's good to know that there are some things that they can do. We can allow them to, meet in the park, ride their bikes, because they feel like they're in prison. So it's good to know that there are some things that they can do. So we want to thank you guys for sharing this time with us. Thank you for blessing us with your wisdom and your knowledge. And to our viewers, remember that you can email us anytime, family@cotosda.org. We want to hear from you. Ask your questions, send your comments. We love to hear from you. So Dr. Greaves, Dr. Gilpin, thank you guys so much for spending this hour with us. We appreciate you taking the time to do so.
Thank you.
Have a blessed evening, and we will see everyone next week, same place, same time. Good evening.